The P40B Warhawk was a sturdy and rugged aircraft that saw combat in almost every theatre in World War II, but it was overshadowed in history by more elegant and advanced designs. Join me in this video as I build and review the Airfix plastic scale model kit of this unassuming yet important aircraft. Hello and welcome to Model Minutes. Today's video is a beginner's guide to the Airfix Curtiss P40B Warhawk in 1/72nd scale. It comes as part of the Pearl Harbor Dogfight Doubles gift set. This video is the second part of 3 in this mini-series, where in the previous episode I built and reviewed its adversary, the Mitsubishi A6m2B Zero, that is also included, and a third and final part will bring the two kits together on their display stand. Before we start the kit, as always, remember that adult supervision may be required due to the use of sharp tools and toxic paints and chemicals. Airfix recommends this kit for those aged 8 years old and over. Normally, in my videos, I assume that people watching have a little understanding of model kit construction, but for this one I'm going to break it down a bit more for those of you who've been out of the modelling hobby for a while or are thinking of getting started for the first time. So let's take a look at the kit. The gift set consists of 2 model aircraft kits, an unassembled display stand, 8 acrylic paints, 2 paint brushes, a tube of polycement, a set of decals and an A4 instruction booklet. For the purpose of this video, I'll only be focusing on the components required to build the P40. 2 light grey plastic sprues contain the main components of the model, and an additional clear sprue features the cockpit canopy. The sprue is the extra part of the kit containing all the main components, and these parts will need to be cut away from the sprue in order to assemble the model kit. The sprue can then be recycled or reused depending on what you want to do with it. The instructions consist of an A4 booklet, which contain information about the actual P40B Warhawk, safety warnings and general information about how to read the instructions and prepare the parts for assembly. Make sure you spend a little time studying the instructions, as the steps and diagrams for assembling the model can be confusing at times. Patience will be key here. Make sure you put the sheet of waterslide decals to one side safely, as we'll need them later. These are the little sticker type things, but we'll cross that bridge later. From the included paints in this kit, you'll need the Humbrol 11 Silver, 33 Matte Black, 128 Compass Grey and 155 Olive Drab for the final finish. Some of the other paints may be required for internal components such as 81 Pale Yellow, but that will be clear in the instructions. I do recommend some extra paints, but we will get to that later. It would also be worth getting a few extra tools too, such as a scalpel or hobby knife, some tweezers to hold fine parts, some clothes pegs to hold parts whilst they glue together, a nail file and some extra paint brushes of different sizes. Also, the green mat you can see in my video is a self-healing cutting mat in A3 size. I use this to protect the table that I'm working on from damage from cutting tools and accidental spills of paints and glues, which sometimes happen. So with all of that out of the way and a better understanding of what's going on, let's start building the kit. The first step I chose to complete was to wash the plastic parts in warm soapy water. The instructions recommend you do this in order to remove any oil or grease left over from the moulding process. This will help give the cement and paints a better surface to stick to. Once clean, leave them to air dry. Don't use any cloths, as this can put dust or fibres on the model and spoil the finish. When the parts were completely dry, I then started assembling the 2 fuselage halves and painted the cockpit walls. The parts were cut from the sprue using a sharp scalpel, and then any rough parts or unwanted plastic were filed using a nail file. The parts were painted with Humbrol acrylic 81 Pale Yellow, which was thinned with a drop of water. These were then left to dry and I moved on to the propeller assembly. Again, these parts were cut from the sprue and cleaned up with a file. Then a small amount of polycement was used to glue them together. I opted to paint the propeller assembly before attaching it to the model, as it could be more difficult to do at that point. The blades are painted silver on the front, black on the rear, and the nose cone is a matte olive drab. I again thinned the paints, but I'll talk more about that later. When these parts were dry, I cemented the fuselage halves together, and they align really well due to the design of the kit. This is a newly tooled kit and goes together really well. No filler is required at any stage in the assembly. Next, I removed the bottom wing half from the sprue, again cleaning up as needed. It's at this point that the holes for the display stand will need to be opened up, if you choose to use it. I used a scalpel to open the holes, but a 2mm drill bit would work as well. The internal cockpit components are attached to this bottom half of the wing prior to installation to the fuselage. The parts were cut, sanded and glued together prior to painting. This can be a fiddly step due to the small size of the parts, so some tweezers might be useful at this stage. Having completed this step, I then cut out the decal for the control panel inside the cockpit. It was soaked in warm water, which enables it to slide off the backing paper, and it can then be positioned in the correct place on the relevant plastic component. I'm using Humbrol Decalfix here in order to help the decals to stick to the relevant plastic components. I go more into detail about decal application later, so stay tuned. The pilot was installed at this point, as I thought it would be easier than at the stage the instructions recommend. He was painted olive drab all over, with his life jacket picked out in yellow, his face in an appropriate flesh colour, which I used Humbrol 61, and his goggles in silver. Make sure when you cement parts together that you remove any paint, as it will help with the glue bonding the two parts together. The fuselage can then be placed over the top of the cockpit and cemented to the bottom of the wing. The upper parts of the wings can then be attached. At this point, all that is left of the main assembly are to add the tail surfaces and the landing gear. I'd like to point out that you are given the choice of raised or lowered landing gear, but as I had already decided in my previous video to pose these models on the included display stand in a flying pose, I opted to model them raised. Whilst you watch me finish the general construction of this model, I'll tell you a little bit about the actual P40B Warhawk. The P-40 was a fighter aircraft designed in the late 1930s. It was utilised by many Allied air forces in the early days of World War II and was the main fighter aircraft of the United States Army Air Force in 1941. The P-40B Warhawk had two 50 caliber machine guns in the nose and four 30 caliber machine guns in the wings. This formidable firepower, its rugged design, and its good handling characteristics at low to medium altitudes meant that it was a capable aircraft in the early stages of the Second World War. Due to the lack of supercharger in the engine, it was found to be underpowered above 15,000 feet, and as a result was replaced by newer aircraft as the war progressed. The aircraft that Airfix have decided to depict in this model kit is that of 2nd Lieutenant George Welch of the 47th Pursuit Squadron based at Wheeler Field in Hawaii during the attack on Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. With the majority of construction complete at this stage, I then primed the model with Humbrol No. 1 grey primer as a base for the acrylic paints. The reason I did this was because I tested the included paints and they failed to stick to the plastic correctly. When the primer was dry, I moved on to the underside of the model and painted that first with 128 US Compass Grey. When that was dry, the upper side of the model was painted 155 olive drab. To get the best results with acrylic paints, they can be thinned with water, although specialist thinners are available. I thin my enamel paints with white spirit, as it is cheap and easily available, but once again, specialist thinners can also be sourced for enamel paints. I tend to do about a 1:2 ratio of thinner to paint, but you may have to experiment with what works best for you. The reason the paint can be thinned is in order to avoid leaving brush strokes on the finished model. Keeping the paint more fluid until it dries will result in fewer visible lines. My general rule of thumb is to start with the lightest colour first, then progress to the darker colours. I find that it's always easiest to paint a dark colour over a light one rather than the other way around. Next, I applied a varnish coat over the top of the model. I used Humbrol 135, which is a satin varnish. A satin or gloss varnish should be used as the base for the application of decals, as this prevents the decals from appearing silver and shiny on the model. The decals were soaked in warm water and then gently applied to the kit, which had already been given a coat of Humbrol Decalfix solution in the relevant position. The decals are positioned and left to cure. The solution allows for the decals to conform to the complicated contours and details of the model and look like they're painted on. Once applied to the model and you're happy with them, don't be tempted to move them around again, as the solution will make the decals very sticky and they could end up folded over or in the wrong place, and if this happens it's quite difficult to fix the problem. For more information on how to apply decals, I made a video on this topic, so I'll add the link below. The next step was to apply a further coat of matte varnish Humbrol 49 to the model, which ensures an even finish and helps blend the decals into the paint scheme. When that coat of paint was dry, the cockpit canopy was then installed. I used a general purpose glue as it won't react with the plastic and fog it up, which polycement has a habit of doing. Humbrol 11 Silver was then dry brushed over the model to give it a light metallic effect and highlight the details. I removed the majority of the paint off of the paintbrush onto a paper towel. Then, with the residual paint, I brushed it over the model and only the raised details will collect the silver paint and make them look slightly chipped, as if revealing the bare metal underneath. I then added the exhausts and the pitot tube, which had been painted on the sprue. They were left until the end to make painting them easier. I applied a dark wash, which I made from Humbrol 33 matte black, water and a drop of washing up liquid. This was then painted onto the model and then removed again using a damp towel. The surface of the model is wiped clean, but the panel lines and sunken details collect the wash and it highlights the details. I didn't want too much of a wash left in this kit, however, so I removed most of the black wash with the cloth. I decided to add stains from the engine exhausts and gun ports. To do this, I used a black pastel, rubbing it into the relevant area of the kit, then dragging a dry paintbrush over the top in the direction of the airflow as if it's in flight. This drags the dust away, leaving a realistic stain. The final improvement was to install the radio wires. I used my standard method of stretching the leftover sprue by heating it up over a candle and then drawing the two ends away from each other to make a really fine wire. Be super careful with this step. For more information on this method, I've got a video featuring this technique on my channel, so why not check it out. These fine wires were then cut to length and a small dot of polycement used to glue them in the correct place on the model. They were then painted grey to blend them into the model. I did struggle with the wires to the wings, however, so decided to leave them off for now. And that's as far as I went with the construction of this Curtiss P40B Warhawk model kit. And here are the finished results. I found it didn't take too long to complete, and realistically the kit can be constructed in about 8 hours, not including the drying time of the paints. It's quite easy to build, but perhaps a little fiddly at times, especially if it's your first kit, but practice does make perfect. As this is a more recently designed model from Airfix, it has a good mould quality, fine detail and a good fit during construction. This kit was easier to build than the Zero in my previous video, so if you've got this set, I'd suggest building this one first. If I were to build it again, I'd add the wires I'd left off this one, and also build it with the wheels down and perhaps as part of a diorama. What do you have planned with your kit? This kit has been available in different versions, either as part of this gift set, a starter set, or on its own, which comes with different decal options. You can find a video of the starter set in RAF Desert colours as a time-lapse build on my channel, and also the earlier version in RAF Battle of Britain colours as a review. I'll add the links under the video. Airfix have a habit of constantly releasing this kit in different paint schemes, and this particular version does seem to be currently out of production, but there is usually a P40 in their range. I'll add the link to the latest version at the time this video is made underneath the video if you want to see for yourself. The gift set retails for about £20 in the United Kingdom, which is a reasonable price in my opinion, but as always I do like to try and find a deal, so I managed to get it cheaper. As previously stated, Airfix don't seem to be currently producing this kit, but stocks may exist in other retailers. I'm impressed with the kit of this rugged aircraft from Airfix and more than happy with the finished results I've achieved with my Curtiss P40B Warhawk. Don't forget that the next video in this mini-series will feature a build of the display stand and a final review of the set, where I finally bring the two aircraft together, so make sure you check that one out too. As always, let me know what you think of my build, techniques and finished model in the comments below, and if you're just starting out in the hobby or returning after a break, I'd be eager to hear what you've got planned for your first builds. I'm also keen to hear your suggestions as to other kits that you'd like to see me build on my channel, so feel free to post that too. All that's left to say is thanks for watching this video, and don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe in order to see more content and help support the channel. And feel free to share this video with your family and friends. And you can connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. See you all again next time.